Welcome to Camera Shake Podcast, episode 128, the podcast where we talk about photography, videography, and anything that's got anything to do with any of that. In today's episode, we have another special guest. Please welcome the wedding, commercial, headshot photographer, drone pilot, and by far the biggest brain in technology that I've ever met. Give it up for Mr. Tech for Togs himself, Peter Morgan. Peter, how are you?
Hey, how you doing? All right, Kersten. Yeah, really good actually. All things considered, with kind of everything that we're going into, with all the budget and everything that's happening, and the fact that I've got a cold, we're doing really well actually. Lots of being able to help lots of photographers is always good. And the tech for Togs stuff has certainly gotten better and better. And we've had a wider reach since completing the second, the photography show. We spoke at the photography show again this year. And that was the second year for us, really, which was great. So it just means helping to educate more photographers, really, But it's interesting times at the moment. There's, Windows has got... Windows 11 updates coming out. You've got Mac OS Ventura. There's lots of stuff that's going to be broken in the future. I've got a funny feeling.
And that's, of course, exactly what we're going to be talking about today. Is a lot of technology-based things. We're going to talk about how to back up your data. We're going to talk about what to do in the event of a disaster recovery. And also, I want to have a chat with you about operating systems, because actually, I just had to install Windows 10 on a 10-year-old laptop, so that was a task. Let's put it this way. but of course, I mean, you're really known as being the go-to tech guy when it comes to any kind of, I say photography related technology issues. And the only reason I say that is because as photographers, of course, we are intimately bound to technology, because that's how we create our art. And that's, starting from the camera itself to, of course, the computer and data storage and all the rest of it.
I mean, the camera itself is just a tool that photographers use to capture what we think about and what we see. The way I look at technology is technology should empower us to be able to get what we want, not hinder us. And unfortunately, these days, people can get technology overload, where they buy so much kit, it gets in the way of the vision rather than enhancing it. And ultimately, my job with the tech for Togs stuff that we're doing is not just to ensure that the kit that people have works, but also to make sure that they're using the right kit. You can get too bogged down by using the wrong technology and it not working for you, or just trying to get, like you said before, old technology, trying to get old technology to work. And most people think that newer is always better. Oh, I gotta get a newer camera, gotta get a newer lens. Sometimes it is better to stick with what works and what especially in computer terms moving forward, Yeah,
and also I always think it's a matter of, what your need is. That's the other thing. I've found that, I've spoken about this on this podcast many times, but I used a D750 for the longest time until very recently. That's a 7-8-year-old camera. It's not necessarily, but it absolutely delivered the goods for me, and it absolutely worked. There was zero reason for me to upgrade. Until I got to the point where I kind of thought, well, the shutter count on this is now, because it's a DSLR, the shutter count on this was getting to the point where I felt like I was taking risks.
Yes.
And of course, the last thing you want is, for things to break down when you're in the middle of a job. And that's, so there's a little bit of sort of future proofing involved in me deciding to upgrade. But the same thing can be said for, computer technology and
brand.
I'm actually, as we're talking now, of course, I'm recording myself.
Excuse me.
Sorry. I'm recording myself on a separate camera, but we are talking virtually through a 12-year-old MacBook Pro right now.
Yeah.
And it still has a job.
Yeah, I mean, and people know me as the Mac guy, but I've been doing computers since I was 16 years of age. I'm 48 now, so it's been a while. I had my own IT company for years, and most of the work that was completed was fixing like Windows machines, and stuff that went wrong. Now the world runs on Windows in terms of business, but creatives that I've come across will use Mac because there are fewer problems, because you have to reboot less, because the workflow is more streamlined, everything's a little bit more better looking, and that was always Apple's kind of forefront, really, wasn't it? It was kind of form and function going together. The reason that I still continue to use Mac, although we have Windows machines here for certain things, is that there are fewer problems. Just generally, there are fewer problems.
Well, I tell you what, I was going to ask you about this because this is exactly my experience. I switched to Mac a good, I would say 13, 14 years ago. And, prior to that, I was continuously going through a laptop a year and a half, something like that. And then when I switched to Mac, I literally ran this MacBook Pro for 10 years, until I got to the point where it did really handle the latest operating systems too well. But I'm constantly in this conversation with my cousin, who's an IT expert over in Germany, and he's really married into the Windows, Windows system. So when you look around you and you look at other creatives, it is very obvious that the vast majority of creatives prefer to use Macs. And whoever you speak to, will say, well, because they're more reliable and they don't break down as much. So why do you think that is?
There's a couple of reasons. Apple will design their product with the components that they know will work together in it. So you will know when you get a computer, PC users will complain, but I can't put a different graphics card in it, and I can't put a different hard drive in it, and I can't do this and that. But that's the point, is that all of the components that are in there have been tested and proven to work correctly together. The beauty of Windows is that you can add whatever graphics card you want or however much RAM you want, different types of hard drives, and Windows as an operating system should be able to cope with it by installing all these different drivers to make all these different parts that you've put together work. But with a Mac, somebody else is doing that for you, really. They're taking those decisions out of your hand so that you can just get on with what you were meant to be using the computer for. When I was using a Windows machine, I found that I spent more time cleaning the disk, running antivirus, doing updates than I did creating, which surely as creatives is the point behind this, the point is that we are here to create, not let everything get in the way of creating. So that's the difference I see. There's always going to be things that a PC does better. Have you ever tried playing a game on a Mac? My son uses his PC for games. They're great for that. But, very few people make games for Macs. So, but they are a creator's tool, really. And you're never going to get a Mac without any problems. They produce too many of these machines for there not to be an acceptable amount of failure rate, as it were. But overall, there's just, in my experience, there's fewer things that go wrong. You're right in the situation where you kind of move from, as a creative, you move towards using a Mac because you're spending less time on everything other than creating.
Yeah, bizarrely, I also found that I've actually spent less money because like I said, I used this when I first bought this MacBook Pro, 11, 12 years ago, whatever. It was quite pricey. It was more expensive than an equivalent PC laptop. But seeing that I used to, change laptops, like I said, every year, maybe every 2 years or something, I actually, in the long run, ended up saving money because I never replaced this MacBook Pro for the longest time. So, it was a matter of, peace of mind. And actually, my wallet was thanking me too in the end.
Yeah, people replace PCs because they'll either fail, they'll fail, or components within them will fail, or they'll just get too slow. People don't tend to replace Macs. My daughter has got my 2009 20-inch. It's not even a 21-inch. It's a 20-inch iMac that she uses for school. And it's only working. The operating system is quite old now. It's working on Sierra. It wouldn't even take High Sierra, which is the next one along. But it works perfectly, for what she wants. So Macs don't generally tend to fail. If they do, it's more likely to be issues like graphics card failures, stuff like that. And that's just down to the machines working really hard, and maybe the ingress of the dust, and kind of, I've seen one before where someone had a MacBook Pro that they'd use in bed when they were editing in the night, and they just drop it onto their quilt, and keeps it nice and toasty warm, but there's no air getting to the Mac, and they just overheat, and eventually it kills the processor.
Yeah, done that.
But there's an underlying reason for a Mac to not work, rather than the PC. But you said that you were installing Windows on a 10-year-old PC. The fact that you can still do that, that's great.
Yeah, it took a little bit of doing, and
excuse me.
And I did spend a lot of time on FaceTime to my cousin, who was guiding me through the process. It was it's an old laptop that, in fact, my mom didn't use anymore because she switched to iPads and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
And my wife needed basically a glorified typewriter, to basically do some studying and some work on. So really, all it needs to do is connect to the internet and produce Word documents, and that's it. So it wasn't no high demand. But
I think the thing you mentioned before about kind of moving operating systems is as well. And there's I think Windows, so Microsoft and Apple have two very different considerations, really, when it comes to the kind of operating systems. Microsoft went through a period where every kind of 4 years or so, they changed the operating system. You were looking at Windows 95, 98, ME. Remember that?
Oh, I remember that.
Windows, NT as well, and you had Windows 2000, Windows Vista.
XP, I remember. I had for a long time.
Windows Vista, Windows 7, and then Windows 10 has stayed around for the longest amount of time, really. With only the Windows 11, interestingly, I've tried it out and I've run it as on my Mac as a virtual machine to run certain things that I could only run on Windows, perhaps. And it's interesting that it looks more like the Apple infrastructure, the Apple desktop, than any Windows machine I've ever seen before. And it's going to leave, I think it's going to leave people a little confused. I've used Windows machines all my life, but the start menu, the start menu is kind of on the center of the taskbar, and it's kind of, it's still a little bit sort of messy in my opinion.
I think I checked out of Windows when it came up with the tiles. Wow. That was like, okay, that's too much for my brain. I can't handle that.
When you look at Apple as a consideration, they make small incremental changes. So if you look at the operating systems like Sierra, High Sierra, Mojave, Monterey, El Capitan, all of the different operating systems they do, there's been small changes. Big Sur, they changed a lot of the icons, but so much of what changes is done in the background as well. It's not just what you see. People think, it's just only a few little changes here. But incrementally, when you jump across one or two versions over the span of a couple of years, there's quite a lot of changes, really. That being said, when it comes to technology, I always advise people to stay at least one version behind.
Right.
And I've got a bit of a horror story actually to tell you that concerns me over the last couple of days. So I thought Ventura had come out. I'd resisted downloading it because I'm running Monterey, and I'd only really upgraded to Monterey, which is the previous version, from Big Sur in the last sort of 6 months, really, when I sort of tested it. I use a piece of software called Parallels Desktop, which is a program that allows you to run what's called a virtual machine. Right. So you run the program, you load Windows or Mac into it, and it allows you to run that as if it was running on the internal hard drive. So you can see what it looks like, and it would look like you were running it on the computer. But once you've finished with it and you don't want to use it anymore, you can just dump the image that it makes into the trash, and it doesn't stay installed on your computer. So you boot up Parallels Desktop, and I used it to try out Windows 11. The beauty of Parallels Desktop, and I'm not sponsored by them or anything, but I've been using it forever, is that you can change the configuration. So if you think, I wonder how this would run if I gave it 8 gig of RAM instead of 4 gig of RAM.
Right, okay.
You can change that in the back end and then run it again. So you can alter how much RAM your computer gives these virtual machines to be able to run, which is the beauty, because it allows people to sort of say to me, I'm running this with 8 gig of RAM and I can't seem to get it running. So I'll try it with 16 gig of RAM. And okay, look, you need to run 16 gig of RAM. It works incredibly better with this. So it allows me to do that. And I thought, I'll download Ventura, give it a try, test it out, see what it's like, give people my initial considerations, see what they think, and then advise them, when maybe it's safe to start using it, Normally within 12 months, I'd say, give it at least 12 months, stay one version behind. So I went to download it, and like almost every other Apple operating system, it'll download it and it'll ask you, would you like to install this? Not Ventura. So I literally set it downloading, closed the lid of my laptop because we've got Power Nap running, which will allow it to download in the background, disappeared off to go to a shoot, take some photographs, came back, and it had already installed. Already installed for me, which I thought was a bit annoying because it didn't give me the choice. It was just already installed on there. So I was like, right, okay, I know I've got a Time Machine backup because that backed up last night. I haven't done anything since. I can restore to that. No problem at all. I should have seen that coming, really, but ultimately, my mistake. So I thought I'll test out a few programs. I use Light Blue, for instance, to handle all my shoots and all my, all my bookings and things like that. And that was causing major problems with Light Blue. Wacom tablets couldn't be found straight away. That wouldn't work for some reason because I got an older Wacom tablet. And there was a few other things that it had changed, like the control panel. The control panel, we know, that's been there forever. That's completely changed now. Might be something I'd get used to, but really kind of threw me. Didn't like that. A lot of things have changed. It's not called system preferences anymore. It's called system settings. What was wrong with preferences? It's it's fine. Apple, if you're watching, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. There's a reason why the MagSafe made a reintroduction. Just because if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Make it good, make it fast, make it work. That's all we need. That's all we need. It's our job as creatives to kind of make things look amazing. All we need are the tools to do it, really. So Ventura then, I thought, right, okay, I'm going to restore this from a time machine backup, which would, on an M1 Mac, would literally be shut it down, hold down the power button for more than 4 seconds, and it'll come up with a menu saying that it's launching into startup options. When startup options comes up, it's a bit like Command and R or R that you would hold down when you boot in an Intel Mac. Takes you into these settings, one of which is disk utility, one of which is restore from time machine, reinstall Mac OS, which at the time would be Ventura, because it allow you to reinstall the operating system that's already installed on there. And there's another option, I can't remember what it is off the top of my head. But, so you've got your 4 options in there. Trying to restore from time machine when Ventura is installed won't let you go back to Monterey. The actual process is you have to wipe the drive completely. So you go into disk utility, click on the main drive, wipe it completely, which always after all these years gets me a little nervous. But knowing that I've got good time machine backups that I regularly check meant that I was fine with that. Wipe it. When you reboot after wiping it, you hold the power button down again, it comes back in. It then asks you to, because it has no operating system on it at that point. So it allows you to reinstall Monterey, reboot, install Monterey as a completely new operating system, then reboot again, and then use something called Migration Assistant, which takes all the applications, users, settings, everything the time machine has backed up for your old operating system, and then pulls them in onto your new clean Monterey system and allows you to boot. And in fairness, it worked like a dream. Wasn't what I'd normally expect, the process, but it worked great. And in total, it took about 8 hours. So yeah, so it was. It's not a quick process, but be aware if you do decide to download Ventura, there's a button that says automatically update my operating system, and tick that. That's the best bet.
Right.
I mean, it looked nice. It looked lovely. You know, there were some changes in there that I thought were unnecessary. Definitely some things I wouldn't use in there. Like there's advanced SharePlay features and messages, updates, and a few other things that just were not really of any use to me. But again, we're talking about Apple being incremental updates. You know, this year it's just, fix this, do that. I'd love to see them do more with mail. Introduce kind of read receipts and send receipts into mail. You know, Outlook has had those for years.
Or unsend.
Unsend. Yes, unsend will work now with Ventura on messages for up to 10 minutes. So which is quite good. But I always think in WhatsApp, when someone unsends something to me, I'm thinking, ooh, was that meant for me? Were they criticizing something or I accidentally mentioned? Have I done something wrong? And then they thought better of it. So it can sometimes create more questions than answers, really.
And you mentioned Time Machine, and of course, the Time Machine is a great way to back up, your Mac. But for photographers, what's extremely important is backing up your images, their data in general. Like, I mean, I think everyone I know, runs a gazillion different hard drives, for different things, whether that's like video or photos and stuff. What are your recommendations when it comes to, just simply backing up?
It's an important subject. People, and there's a misconception that if you've got something on another drive, that it's backed up, which is a very bad misconception to have, really. There's a rule when you do backups that you have a magic triangle of backups. So let me explain, really. a magic triangle has got 3 points, okay? By the same token, you have 3 different backups in different locations using a different form of media. Each one has different characteristics than the other, and each one supports the other. I'll give you an example. So the first part of the magic triangle is you have to have an off-site backup. Wherever you're editing, whether it's in a studio or in your office or even at home, there's the potential there for the studio to burn down, somebody to break in and steal what you've got there. Your internet connection stops working or what have you. The on-site backup, so that might be a network attached storage device. I've got literally, I don't know whether you can see it down there, but my network attached storage device is just there. And that's a Synology DS 1821 Plus. That's my RAID NAS. That's my on-site backup. That sits here. Everything that I finish, the work that I finish, gets put on there. That is considered backed up there. Okay? That's my on-site. Off-site, again, that's the second part. So one on-site, one off-site. And the third part is cloud. That's something that's not in any particular place, but it's looked after by somebody else. Someone like Backblaze or the Crash Plan, Carbonite. There's lots of Synology do their own C2 backup as well. That would be your kind of cloud-based backup. Now, I'm very lucky that the Synology has the ability to install different programs on it called packages. They call them packages, and that one of those packages is a Cloud Sync package, which allows you to link to lots of different cloud-based providers. And then the process is you select which folder wants to be backed up, and then you select when you wanted to back up, as in what time of day or night, and then you let it run, and then overnight it'll back up those files onto the cloud from whatever you change. It does one big backup and then incrementally small backups of just the things that change. So that's your kind of cloud-based backup. Now, off-site can be a number of things. So we've talked about on-site backup being something that you back up here. It could be a single hard drive, or it could be lots of hard drives, like a RAID array, Off-site backup is going to be something that's physically taken away, whether that's a drive that is backing up from your office and is taken physically somewhere else, or whether it's something, like Backblaze. That's what you have to consider. The reason that is different and how that differs to cloud-based backup is cloud-based backup is reliant on your internet. Okay, if you've got bad internet, trying to download a whole album's worth of files, it's going to take time. That's where that falls down. That's why your on-site, which is quicker because the files are physically there, supports that, The off-site is physically, if something happens to one of those drives, you've got slow internet, you can physically drive somewhere and pick those files up. Or, in my case, I use a company called Zenfolio. Now, whilst it is similar to a cloud-based backup, it allows me to go to an internet cafe or anywhere that has a better internet connection and just download those files. And I deliver my JPEGs for my customer. Completed JPEGs go to Zenfolio. So they look after my website, but they also look after all my images as well. And that's why having those 3 backup points, the magic triangle, as it were, allow for a more secure backup. Now, Time Machine is something different, and I'll explain where Time Machine fits in now. Windows users have lots of different companies they can use instead of, they've got, loads of different backup programs that they can use to back up, and there's no real, the inbuilt option that was in Windows 10 was migrated from Windows 7, and it's not great. You're still going to have all the original disks if you if you have to reinstall your operating system.
Sure.
So, whereas Time Machine, really speaking, it backs it up like a snapshot. So you don't need any of the original installed disks. Or, I mean, nobody uses those anymore. Everything's done online.
Sure.
But the point being is that when you kind of launch Time Machine and get it to restore, it can restore to the exact moment that your backup was in place. My Time Machine is plugged in to my drive, and I've actually got, there you go. So that's my Time Machine. I've got a little lacy, rugged drive, so they're quite handy. That one's a 2 terabyte, and that wasn't backing up at the moment. No, that's good. That literally backs up this computer. It doesn't back up any of my photographs whatsoever. Because my photographs are not stored on the computer, if something was to happen to the computer, I wouldn't lose my photographs. Okay. The lacy drive and the Time Machine program is there just to restore the operating system. Nothing else. Because when you talk about backup, so much of that goes hand in hand with workflow. And by that, I'm talking about the way that we shoot as photographers. As a wedding photographer example, you will have 2 cards in your camera, maybe, camera card failure is very rare these days, but it does happen. So having a camera that has got the 2 cards in there where you're copying to both, you're mitigating the risk somehow. There's a little bit of redundancy there if something goes wrong. And that's what we're all about, really, with backup and disaster recovery. So when you've taken photographs as a photographer, what happens with us is that when we stop for the for dinner, and the bride and groom are having the wedding breakfast, I will use that time to take my second shooter's photographs, and I'll put it into a Lacy Boss drive or another backup drive, and that will back up the photographs that we've taken so far onto a hard drive. So I know at that point I've got copies on the SD and CF cards, but I've also got copies on my rugged Lacy Boss drive as well. So so that's backed up there. That way, if my cameras ever get damaged, stolen, or something happens, at least I've got everything. I'm doing as much as I can to try and mitigate the risk there and then. At the end of the night, my second shooter will give me their cards. We'll put them in, back them up to the boss, and they can walk away with them then. I haven't got to take anything away or give people my cards to use or anything like that. And that's backed up. So when I get home and I've finally put all my equipment away, put the batteries on charge, and I've sat down, then I will I don't even have to take the cards out of the cameras, right? I can literally plug the Lacy Boss straight into the computer, and I can either, because the Lacy Boss that I have is an SSD, I can either edit directly off that, or what's more likely to happen is I've got there you go. I've got this. So this is a Lacy rugged Pro SSD. It's about the size of a credit card, and it's an SSD. But rather than being like the orange drives, which are very fast, but the older style SATA hard drives, these SSDs are designed to work incredibly quickly. They'll actually read and write at speeds almost as fast as your internal Blade SSDs that the new Macs will use. which means that I can load everything from a wedding onto that drive. So by now, at this point, remember now, I've got the photographs on the cards, which I haven't wiped yet. My photographs on the cards. I've got photographs of my second shooter and myself on the Lacy Boss, and I'm ingesting those by using copy function in Lightroom, and it copies them onto this drive. I'll edit on this drive, and my SD cards and my Lacy Boss don't get wiped until I finish the edit. If I got another shoot the next day, I'll have a spare set of SD cards. So I'll put the one set of cards that are full to one side. I'll use a spare set of SD cards and shoot on those. And again, they get backed up on the Lacy Boss. So that's the process about kind of ingesting. Once the photographs are edited and they're all complete, I'll save the metadata to the files. So in Lightroom, under catalog settings, under file handling, you've got a option to write XMP, write changes to XMP. And what that does is creates a little file that sits alongside the original RAW with all of Lightroom's changes in it. So if you were to take all your photographs and you wanted someone else to see them, but have the RAWs as well, you can give them the XMP, which has got the same file name, but with the extension XMP. Yeah. And they'll be able to see all the changes that you made when they import that. So when I finished editing those pictures, the RAW file plus the XMP gets saved onto my NAS over there. Overnight, that backs up from 11 o'clock in the night through to 7 in the morning. It'll back up any changes to Backblaze, which is my offsite. So at that point, then I can clear down the cards. I can free up the space on the Lacy Boss. Generally, I'll have 3 or 4 weddings on, or 3 or 4 shoots on the Lacy Boss there. And I'll just clear them down when I need more space on there. So having the mindset, the workflow mindset, where you're at every single point, you're making a decision to move, copy, back up those files elsewhere. You should have at least one backup somewhere else. Well, so you never know what's going to happen, right? And I've had things go wrong, card failure. I've had things go wrong. I've had like cameras stolen at a wedding, and it's very distressing. Cameras can be replaced. Photographs are forever,
I think if you do this job long enough, pretty much everyone I know has some story or another, when it comes to like losing photographs, losing data. I've wiped SD cards with video footage, accidentally before I thought I had backed it up, but then I didn't. I had SD card failure in a camera before. These things do happen. I had hard drive failures, external hard drive failures as well. So,
yeah. And when you look at technology, all technology is ultimately fallible, because it's designed by humans, right? We make things as good as they can be, but ultimately nothing is designed to work forever. So as technology gets better, failure rates drop, but ultimately the only way to never lose anything is to ensure that you've got appropriate backups, and that your workflow has to work. Your workflow has to work, for you as well.
As the more you can automate these processes, the safer they get in a sense, because then it's not down to, me forgetting to do something, because that's often, I think the human failure rate is relatively high in these circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely. When you look at these things and technology in general, and whether it's kind of like, I'm just looking, what I've got on my desk. So there's a Wacom tablet, We've got I've got the loop deck. Have you seen these? These loop,
Oh yeah.
brilliant. I love those. They're really good. Ultimately, I'll know whether or not something I'm going to continue using something because it'll fit within my workflow. If not, they either get sold, given away, kind of sent back, you know. And they just technology has to fit within my workflow, really, you know. And and I've got it down to a fine art now. I've got it down to a fine art, but it is so much like you know, it is very much like kind of you know, don't buy technology for the sake of buying technology. Buy something that you think you're definitely going to use, you know. So when it comes to backup, really speaking, what I'd suggest is buy the best systems that you can afford at the time you're going to buy. The technical side of things you could kind of leave to us, and we'll decide, you know, what's the best to help you with, you know, according to your needs. But ultimately, when you've got using single drives, it can be disaster, because when one drive dies, that's it. You've kind of you've limited yourself. That's what they call in the business. That's the single point of failure. And having that as a single point of failure, you know, it's just people will spend, you know, 200 quid on a drive that they'll use for 12 months and then replace it after 12 months. And you end up with a drawer full of drives. And for me, that's as difficult to find a picture. Like, I can't remember which drive a photograph I took of Brenda and David, their wedding in 2015 is.
Or you end up buying bigger drives, you know, so you go from like a 1 terabyte drive to 2, and then you upgrade to a 4 terabyte drive. And so you end up with a whole ton of drives, you know, in the drawer. And so
absolutely,
it's going to increase for you.
I did some work for a company in London, and the guy was talking to me about hard drives. Oh, I need a better solution than just using single hard drives. I said, how many are you up to at the moment? He said 47. And he opened a drawer, and there was literally a drawer full, stacked up of drives. I'm like up to 6 now of old drives, but they're mostly drives from the RAID array. So as I want to expand the array, I take smaller drives out and replace them with bigger drives, you know. But yeah, I mean, having a RAID-based disk spreads the data across all the disks rather than having just one disk failure.
Yeah. So let's dive into that for a second, because I think that's probably sort of the ultimate backup, on-site backup sort of advice is really to look closely at NAS systems, so RAID arrays.
So NAS systems are network attached storage, but that's basically a system that is designed to plug into your router in your network and wherever your broadband's coming in, rather than plugging into the back of the computer. Now, they're used primarily as storage devices rather than drives you would normally edit from, because they're not quick enough. Some of the better systems will have more than one network port on the back and will allow you to spread the pull and push of data across the cables. I'll give you an example of what I mean now. That Synology device has got 4 network cables in the back. So rather than just plugging one cable into my router, I've actually got 4 plugged in, okay? So when I'm requesting a file from there to edit, rather than pulling all the file via one cable, which has a limit of 1,000 megasecond transfer rate, it's actually pulling a quarter of the file from each of the cables, which means that the pull of the file comes infinitely quicker. The actual specifications mean that instead of 1,000 megasecond transfer rate, I'm getting 4,000 megasecond transfer rate. It's due to a clever system called link aggregation. and failover. So if one of those cables fails, I can still use the other three. The link will drop in speed from 4,000 to 3,000, but ultimately it'll mean that the link still works and it allows me to transfer data, and it spreads the data pull across the 4 cables, which means that I can actually edit directly from that without any loss of speed at all whatsoever. And it's great. I don't necessarily need a drive plugged in into there, but it's just easier for me to have that drive plugged in there, because if I decide to take that and edit downstairs with my MacBook Pro, I can literally go and unplug that and sit on the sofa and edit directly from the small little black drive that I was showing you earlier. But the beauty of NAS drives is most will have at least 2 ports on the back. The type of companies you want to go for are Synology. I've been making drive systems for years. QNAP are very good as well. QNAP make great drives. I had Buffalo drives before this. They made the Terra Station range. They were very good as well. Western Digital make them. So there's lots of different companies that will make these. Seagate, who only make their own systems as well, with the big 2 and the big 4 systems. So there's lots of companies out there. Each has got different advantages and disadvantages, and that's really kind of where we can sort of point you in the direction of one or the other. But so the easiest way to describe how a NAS system works is, imagine you take your favorite photograph and you cut it into 4. And you, on the back of the photograph, you label the first piece A, the second piece B, the third C, and the fourth one D. Now, if I had 4 drives in my RAID box, okay, on the first drive, if I stored that picture on the drive, the RAID software would actually split it up, but make it look like it was one. I'd only ever see it as one file. But actually the file is stored on drive 1, parts A and B, drive 2, B and C, drive 3, C and D, and drive 4, D and A. So this is in a RAID, what you call a RAID 5 configuration. Okay, so RAID 5 is just a configuration of how those drives are set up to work together. There's other different versions of RAID, but that's amongst the most common. If any of those drives physically broke and I had to throw them away, even though the array, the box, becomes read-only until I replace the drive, I can still see the file because I've got A, B, C, and D on the 3 remaining drives. So I can still get my file back. It's just the redundancy isn't there. It won't allow you to write new stuff to the disk array because you're not writing to all the drives. You'd only be writing to 3 out of the 4 drives. And you'd be missing an actual section of that file. When you put the new disk back in, the systems will either automatically with some or with others, they just need a click of a button on it. It will use the 3 remaining disks to rebuild the content of what's missing back onto the new drive. And once that's all working, you can then start writing to the drive again. Now, RAID 5 allows you to lose 1 drive before the system would crash. RAID 6 is very similar. It allows you to lose 2 drives. The disadvantage of other RAID configurations is that you lose the amount of space that you have available. So it all comes down to how much space you have available, because it has to store bits of drives and it becomes a little bit more complicated. But people would use RAID 6 for databases and things like that. And it's not quite as fast as RAID 5. And they'd use RAID 5 literally just as a standalone system. But it gives you some form of redundancy so that your data is being backed up. And the chances of all hard drives failing at the same time is very rare. Now, I've only ever heard of it once, and that was when a client of mine, not a photographer, in a business, had bought 4 drives from the same batch, and they'd had a power outage, and it had kind of failed. All 4 drives had failed on a really old array system, and ultimately they were saved by having on-site backup. But you can see yourself having those kind of options really within a NAS system is going to be your ultimate backup.
And of course, it's going to be relatively straightforward to upgrade the disk as well if you're running out of space at some point. You just
yeah. And I mean, I'm not sponsored by Synology or anything. I should be, but I'm not. One of the reasons why I chose their system over some of the others is that they have got an option called SHR, which is Synology Hybrid RAID, which allows you to put drives of different sizes in there. With a RAID 5 normally, you would only ever be able to put drives of the same size in there. And if a drive broke, you'd have to replace it with a drive of the same size or larger. But it wouldn't actually give you any more space on the box, on the array, if you put bigger drives on it. Synology Hybrid RAID allows you, as long as you've got 2 or more drives that have got a higher size on there, it'll expand into those extra drive spaces, and it'll allow you to have a drive system that you expand every couple of years. So if you buy them with 1 terabyte drives, in year 2 you might decide to change those drives one by one, because they've got to rebuild, obviously, with 2 terabytes. So instead of having 3 terabytes of usable space, you've now got 6 terabytes of usable space, And then in year 3, you might want to choose to have more space, and so on and so on. So yeah, having the opportunity to be able to do that is imperative, because systems technology, is designed, is designed to last. The last disk station I had was 2015, and I ended up giving it away to a friend of mine. I was just starting out, so but it was still working then, and I replaced that for this new one last year. So they do last, and more often than not, you'll run out of space before the devices break, So especially as file sizes are getting larger and larger, camera file sizes are exponentially increasing to the point where we need bigger memory cards, right?
Yeah.
When I first started taking pictures, I had a 4 gig memory card.
Yeah. I remember them well.
Yeah, absolutely. I found a 16 gig card the other day, and I was like, oh gosh, how many pictures could I take on that?
Yeah, well, absolutely, that's it.
50 pictures, maybe? Yeah, I don't know.
Well, I mean, that is the thing, as we're moving up in megapixels, files get larger. It's the same in terms of video. As we move from shooting in 1080 to 4K, for example, everything becomes bigger.
Absolutely.
And you immediately need more backup space. It's inevitable.
Yes, but you also need to design systems that take into consideration the ability to be able to expand and migrate into having more space. And if I actually physically ran out of space, and I think those take 128 terabytes. If I fill them with the biggest drive size that I can get, which is about 18 terabytes, which is about 18 terabytes, I think. I think I can fit something like 128 terabytes just in that one little box. Yeah. If that wasn't enough, I can then, they've got a cable at the back, an eSATA cable, which allows me to connect a second one to that, and that becomes part of the array. It's just, the potential is just incredible. But again, like I said, it is a case of when do you get to the point where you change your systems? Yeah. And they're designing new systems day to day as well. Yeah. The next model of that might come out and might take 250 terabytes or 400 terabytes. It's about making things last as long as possible so that they can work for you, really, rather than against you. And as I look around with all this kind of technology around me, I am very much like, if something's not fit for purpose, if it's not doing its job, is to get rid of it. But you can spend so much time trying to make things work that don't work, that you're kind of losing the point about technology empowering us to be able to create. And ultimately, that's what we are, right? Is creators, We're the guys that people come to for us to make something great, And whilst you need technology to be able to do that, you can lose hours trying to make old stuff work.
Exactly. And I think, for a lot of creatives, and I sort of count myself amongst those, really, to me, I'm like the ultimate end user. I live in Photoshop and in Lightroom, and I, because those are the tools that I use to create, the photographs that I create. But when it comes to anything under the hood, I'm really not, that clever when it comes to that, because it doesn't necessarily concern me. I'm not necessarily personally that interested in what's happening under the hood, because I see myself as sort of the user of the tool, and like a carpenter who uses hammers all day. You can be the best carpenter but not necessarily know how a hammer is made.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? Because
why do you need to, right?
Yeah, why would you need to? Exactly. But you could be, you could be. I saw this thing the other day, which is incredible, actually. And it was a Canadian wood chopping competition. And what they do is they've got these guys, who are like master wood choppers, I guess, and they do this thing where they have these tree trunks, and then they knock out like little steps, and then as they step up further, they basically end up sort of halfway up the tree, and then they knock off the top of the tree whilst they're build, they're sort of using the axe to create their own ladder almost up to the tree. And it's incredible because the skill required to do that in record time, because they're doing this against the clock as well, that's the thing. So they're literally racing up these tree trunks. It's absolutely phenomenal. And you think, like, these guys really know how to use an axe.
Yes.
But they don't necessarily probably know how to make an axe.
Absolutely, yeah. That's right. I think that's the thing, isn't it? As photographers, it's almost like if you're a wedding photographer, you don't necessarily know how to take baby photographs.
Exactly.
Let's be masters of what we do rather than kind of so pretty good at everything, That's it. The world needs more. Where was it? I think, was it someone in government? I'm not going to mention any names, but was it someone in government said not so long back, I forget the name of who it was, said that that we need less experts, and more people who can just do a job. And I just think that can't be right. Surely you need more experts. You need people who know their craft to the nth degree. And I'm not saying that's necessarily me. I've got a very good broad knowledge of computers. I haven't been brought up with it. But there's still a lot that I don't know. I'm no good at programming, at all. You could never ask me to write any computer programs and stuff. But the point being is, for me, I understand how it all kind of works together and how things fit together. So for photographers and the niche that I've decided to support, it works really well because, I know a lot about that. If I was to start looking at different other areas, then maybe less so. I've been in those rooms, with guys that are so technical, they have no social skills, but can work out incredible calculations in milliseconds within their heads. I've been in those rooms and I've no desire to kind of push myself to that limit. For me, the ability is to be able to take something complex and be able to break it down so that people who don't necessarily need to know all of that, can understand how it works for them. Because you haven't got to understand, like you said, you haven't got to know how a car works to know that you've got to put fuel in it and it's going to take you somewhere. That's the way I see technology is, you haven't got to know how it works, but you have got to know what it can do for you, and kind of getting lost within tech can happen with that, People buy things for the sake of saying they've got stuff rather than actually learning every single minute detail of how something works.
It's an interesting thing with photography, especially in I'd say photography is kind of almost like unique in that respect if you compare it to other art forms, for example. But photography really is, because it's this blend between technology and creativity, it sort of attracts people from both extremes to it. You have those photographers who are super tech-minded, and then on the other end of the scale, you've got photographers who are super creative but don't necessarily know the first thing about how things work. They just have a vision and they realize a vision. And then in the middle, you've got those people who are kind of a 50-50 split between being creative but also technology minded, where it kind of all blends together.
Yeah.
But it's I always find this when I speak to to a whole range of different photographers. You got those guys who come from the film days, who may who don't really necessarily want to have anything to do with computers in post production, and although they have moved on to shooting digitally, they're still sort of living in a world where everything needs to come out straight out of camera and needs to be right in camera and all that kind of stuff, which is fine. There's one way of doing it.
Absolutely.
And then you've got people like myself, to a degree, who shoot for the edit. I very often, especially when I shoot composites, I know what the edit is going to be like and how I'm going to composite it, and so I need to get the raw materials for that. And I always say this, I also need to get it right. I just need to get it right for the edit. It's a it's a slightly different thing, but still the similarity is the shoot process, or the shooting process. It's only one Lego brick in the whole thing.
It's like being a great chef, right? I always like being a great chef and assembling all the different parts to make something better. Exactly. Oh, that's essentially what it's about, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And it was interesting when we spoke before about the photography show and the resurgence of kind of film. Really, I know you said seems to be a massive resurgence of film. And it's great because, as far as I'm concerned, that's teaching people to kind of stop, pause, breathe, and think. Before, not just when we're in photography, but before we do anything, before we go out and buy new hardware or computers or this or that, the other, stop, pause, breathe, and think, kind of take that moment really. And, apart from necessarily wedding photography, where you've got to be aware of everything that's going on around you at all times, having that moment where you can see the photograph in your head before you're shooting it. I think that's a key tool. I've been photographing professionally now since 2015, sort of getting paid for doing it. And before that, it was always a passion, and I've been doing it since I was knee high to a grasshopper. But kind of having that moment where I very rarely get to shoot for myself, really. It's mostly for clients. But I did have some time recently where my partner and I went to France, and we took my kids, and we went for a walk around one of the big towns, and having that moment where I could literally be like, oh, this is great, I get to shoot for me and look at different angles and, kind of see a photograph with my eyes before I, see it through a camera. Because all the camera is just the tool,
absolutely.
right? ultimately that's
You
just
know,
that's the step of the
uh,
the process, really.
that's why I love my little Instax camera.
Mm.
Because it's
Yeah, and those are very-
it's such a great thing, to just because there's zero post production involved. You're literally just capturing the moment,
yeah,
and also it has a great
yeah,
feel, and you have the image there in hard copy form, right there. It's
yes,
a physical image that you can give. And I tell you what, that I use the camera a lot with my kids, for example. When I'm out and about, we're
mm.
doing stuff. We'll take some goofy photos, but it's a lovely thing. For instance, when my mom comes to visit from Germany, for example, and I bring her back to the airport, and we just take a quick selfie together, and then she could take that home as a bit of a memory type of a thing. And it's worked
Yeah,
really well um, when I work with clients, for example, especially
yes,
especially when I do things like um, when I work with like an AV team, like an audio video team, for example. What I
yeah,
do is I hand them sort of like a selfie Instax photo with my number on the
yeah,
back. So rather than handing out a business card, I just I use the Instax
yeah.
photo. That's it.
Cool.
Cool.
On my wall up here, I've got. I don't know whether you can see that.
Oh, I can see
Yeah,
it. Yeah.
those are all in stacks photos. So
Oh, right.
anytime anybody came to have their headshots done, it was like, right, we finished the headshots. Now we're just gonna do a little photograph, and it gets stuck to the wall. And I got loads of kind of famous people up there, things
Yeah.
photographed. We've got
Yeah.
Ross Grieve is up there as well.
Awesome.
Glyn Dewis is up there as well. And
Okay.
who else have we got? Well, there's loads up there. So yeah. So every time somebody would come to the house to have their pictures taken or their
Mm.
computer repaired or something like that, then we just take a little selfie, and it's great.
Yeah.
And that kind of moment where you have to think on your feet
Yeah.
is great. I love that. So yeah,
And that's also, I mean, because there is something obviously to photography that's inevitably kind of physical. I think
mm,
like prints, for example.
absolutely.
And I think that's why people love prints so much still. Although we are living in we've been talking a lot of computers and technology and whatever, but still, in the world of photography, there's still space for all of that
Oh,
physicality as well,
it's not
which is
finished.
fantastic.
A picture's not
Mm.
finished until it's printed.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're just looking at backlit screens. And it doesn't feel that
Mm.
tangible feel. To a
Mm.
picture, the emotion, the kind of soulful kind of
Mm.
pull that you get from a photograph. Especially, you imagine, you got stuff printed on textured paper, and
Mm.
the smell of the print. And I know I'm getting all sentimental here now, but that's what it's about for me. Uh, that's what it's about for me. More than
Mhm.
just kind of printing stuff and sending them to a gallery that people are going to look at. It's about having
Yeah.
something memorable on your wall, or just printed, or just something you can hand on to your children and your children's children. My
Exactly.
I was talking to my dad the other day. He's 83 now. My mother's age varies, kind of somewhere around late 60s, mid 70s, according to how she's
Mm.
feeling in the mornings. Excuse me. And I was saying that, there's a tendency these days, lots of people just want to have their pictures taken and they don't want to print anything. And I said
Mm.
how disappointing I thought that was. And he said, I've got, I've got, I've got our wedding album here. Your mother and I got married, 49 years ago. And so we were sat there, and, for 83, still with it, I have to say. And we were just looking at all these pictures stuck in with the little corners. You know, the
Yeah.
sticky corners? Yeah. Stuck in the
Absolutely.
corners there. And he's like, oh, yeah, this is your great aunt, and people I'd never seen before, or
Mm.
certainly couldn't remember, maybe. I used to own a butcher's shop down the road, and this is so much more than just looking at a picture of two people. It's a history of everybody who went, to a wedding or to a get together, or it's just the stories. It fires and sparks up the stories and the imagination behind it, and that's what it's about, really. I know we started off with talking about technology, but ultimately, that's what all of this stuff is meant to do, is give us the tools to be able to create something fantastic for people, that they couldn't otherwise do themselves.
Exactly.
I was sitting there, with my dad, looking through all these books, half an hour went like that,
Yeah.
Just looking at pictures of people, and I couldn't help find myself being quite sentimental about people that I've never necessarily met, It was just incredible.
Absolutely. And it's, there's no better way to end the show than on that thought.
Absolutely.
So remember, if you are listening to this podcast and you are experiencing any problems with, either with your computers or, backing up your data, then make sure you get in touch with Peter Morgan at Tech for Togs. Obviously, all the links and everything are going to be in the description. Peter, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. I'm sure we're going to be seeing more of each other.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah, I'd like to see what you've done with that Windows machine. See.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you so
Excellent.
much for having me on the show. Thanks for giving me a chance to kind of ramble on about all this tech stuff. But, it's been an absolute joy to be able to talk to you today.
Fantastic. And remember, again, if you are listening to the audio version of this podcast, remember that there's a fully fledged Technicolored version over on YouTube if you are so inclined. And, in order to help us being found, just to, if you would be so kind, and leave us a little star rating or a little review if you're listening on Apple Podcast, or of course, if you are already on YouTube and you've made it this far, then just take out a few seconds and give us a like, follow the channel, and leave us a little comment, because we always love seeing those.
Wonderful.
Anyway, that being said, we've come to the end of Camera Tech Podcast episode 128, and we'll be back next Thursday, as always.